Hey guys, welcome to HipHughes History. We're going to do a little bit of some Union history for you in the next few minutes, which is going to hit on the Pullman Strike of 1894. You really need to know not only the idea about unions in the 19th century in terms of the relationship with big business and the government, but if you don't have an example to write about, then you might as well just stay home because you're going to fail, son. All right, giddy up for the learning. Let's do it. Pullman Strike, 1894. 2, 4, 6, 8. We don't have to. I was just joking. All right, here we go, guys. One of the characters that we're going to want you to know all about is George Pullman, that dude right there. And George Pullman made his millions inventing what's called the sleeper car, which was a car that would attach to a railway car that was kind of luxurious. It was meant for the upper middle class and kind of rich people to ride the railroads. He actually marketed it quite well with the death of Abraham Lincoln. He actually fitted the railroads from Chicago to Springfield in the last leg of Lincoln's funeral so everybody could see the dressed up Pullman car, and then everybody wanted one, and cha-ching, the guy's a millionaire. So what did he do with those millions of dollars? He does what every millionaire does. He made a town named after himself. And that would be Pullman, Illinois, where his factory was. Pullman had figured out that if he built a town for his workers, he could control costs, and he could kind of pump the money he was paying to his workers back into his own pockets. So workers wouldn't really receive their full payment. They would take out their rent and money for their foods and give them coupons, and he really controlled the town pretty hardcore, including freedom of the press and a whole bunch of other stuff we could talk about another time. But the idea is by 1890s, he's made millions of dollars doing this. And then we have an economic recession. It's called the Panic of 1893. And that's going to affect George Pullman's bottom line. He's not going to be making as much money that he was used to making. So in order to keep his profits at where they were, he decided that he was going to cut the wages of his employees at the Pullman Palace Car Company, which is what the name of his company was. So that kind of sucks, you know. He reduced the payment of 4,000 workers, and he decided that he would keep the rent the same. So workers who were doing the same amount of work as they were doing yesterday are now getting paid a whole lot less, and their overhead costs, their rent, is the same. So they decide that they have to do something about it because Pullman would have nothing to do with the workers. He didn't want to negotiate with them. He didn't want to, do any type of collective bargaining with them. He just kind of put his foot down and he said, if you don't like it, hit the road, Jack. Don't you come back no more, no more, no. You get the idea. So what happened? The workers decide to go on strike. And you have to remember they're not part of a union. It's called a wildcat strike where they just decide they're going to walk off the job, all 4,000 of them. And they figure that this is going to bring George Pullman to the negotiation tables. And he puts his foot down, no way. So now let's enter the second part of our story. And a new character, Eugene Debs. Bang, bang for Eugene. So one of the concepts is that there's really two different unions kind of developing in the United States in the mid-late 1800s. One of them is called the AFL, the American Federation of Labor, and this is going to be run by Samuel Gompers. And their union is going to actually oppose this strike that's going to occur. So the union that is going to get involved is called the ARU, or the American Railway Union. And I really think that this is a union that's kind of scrapped together after the failures of what was the Knights of Labor, one of America's first unions formed in 1869. That was basically a union for all workers, for unskilled workers. And that's one of the reasons that they don't have a lot of power, because they're unskilled. They can be replaced. But Eugene Debs decides that this is where he's going to make his mark. This is where he's going to blow up his union, which was just formed like a couple years before. So the ARU organizes themselves, brings in the Pullman workers, and organizes kind of a general national strike against the railroads. All of their workers, 27 cities across the United States, from Michigan to San Francisco, are going to walk off the job if Pullman cars are coming down the tracks. Now, not all workers walked off the job. I think it's really important to understand that the on-rail workers, the conductors, the porters, many of them who were African American, they didn't want anything to do with the union. They felt like their lives were just fine the way that they were. But that union strike, the ARU strike, is starting to work. They're shutting down carriers. They're shutting down the mail. Enter the federal government. You get to shut down the mail. Great, great. All right, so in June when the strike began, I think it was like only 8 or 9 days before they hit 125,000 workers that walked off the job. Eventually, it's going to be 250,000 workers that are going to walk off the job. And remember, their only goal is to force George Pullman to take a seat so they can negotiate. It's not to destroy the country, and they're not communists, they're not anarchists, they're just workers that are trying to flex their union power. And no doubt the railways reacted. The General Managers Association, which was kind of a combination of the railroad bosses and the people that ran the railroads, they gathered their forces and they fought back. They started hiring what the union guys would call scabs. They would say replacement workers. A lot of the replacement workers were African American. African Americans didn't feel welcomed in the ARU, so they figured then we'll just take their jobs, and there's a lot of racial tension in this strike. Eventually, the strike is going to be put down, not by the General Managers Association, it's going to be put down by Grover Cleveland and the federal government. And it was 12,000 U.S. troops that Grover Cleveland called up. They went city by city, breaking these strikes and clearing out these union workers in order to get those railroads open. And this is bang bang the learning concept. That even though the government is in a sense laissez-faire when it comes to economics, when it comes to labor relations, they're not only hands down, they're hands down on the side of big business. Using the Interstate Commerce Clause and the delegated power in the Constitution to run the post office, the Cleveland administration is going to argue that this is an illegal strike, and they go to the federal courts to get an injunction against the ARU and Eugene Debs. That injunction is upheld, and Eugene Debs ignores it. And this is where we start to get to the violence. And we're going to summarize. You certainly are encouraged to go, 15 layers. There's so many great stories that are associated with the Pullman strike. But we're going to end up with roughly $50–60 million back then of damages, 30 deaths, 60 people that were hurt critically. And it really is an example of how the federal government sided with big business and the railroad companies. And their justification, and this is kind of the ironic part of it all, was that they were using the Sherman Antitrust Act. The Sherman Antitrust Act, which was passed the previous decade to go after monopolies and trusts to make sure that there was fair competition, is now being used against labor, against unions, because they're saying that these workers are conspiring together and creating a monopoly of workers in a sense. Eventually, Eugene Debs, even though his first trial was dismissed, eventually, Debs versus United States, he's going to be sent to prison for 6 months for violating that first federal injunction. But at the end of the day, it's a strike that fails. It's a strike that fails because they never got George Pullman to sit down, and they never did anything in terms of forming a real powerful, unskilled labor union. The only unions that are going to survive the long run are going to be the skilled unions like the AFL, who a lot of people are accusing of working within the system, working in a sense with big business in order to create outcasts of unskilled workers who can be paid much less and don't deserve that same type of union protection. Eugene Debs, he goes to prison, and there he becomes radicalized. Eugene Debs read the works of Karl Marx when in prison, and I think it's the combination of what he saw as the federal government through use of marshals attacking labor and being in a concrete prison pushed him over the edge into radicalism, and he becomes a socialist. He'll run for president, I believe, 5 times, and he will lose 5 times. And at the end of the day, although the Pullman strike is going to be a loss in terms of the union column right there, it's also going to be a loss for Pullman because he's going to get his. Because of all the violence, there was an inquiry, a commission that was called together by the federal government that found that one of the reasons for the strike was Pullman's paternalistic town venture that really didn't give workers rights or a voice in their community, and they broke up the charter. They had it incorporated into Chicago, and George Pullman, he might have died with a lot of money, but he didn't die with the city under his belt. So there you go, guys. Now you know a little bit about the Pullman Strike of 1894. Make sure that you check out other HipHughes lectures. We have about 250, and they're growing weekly, and we would like you to subscribe because you'll save the life of a pony. And if you don't want to do that, there's something wrong with you. So there you go, guys. I'll say one more thing. You know what I'm going to say if you watch my lectures. Where attention goes, energy flows. We'll see you on the flip side, guys. Oh, and make sure you check out the new series, the United Stuff of America, which is premiering on June 14th on H2. It'll be running through the summer, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I think that if you watch that, you might recognize somebody, if you know what I mean.